You. Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Cisneros. I'm a assistant extension professor in the Department of Natural Resources in the University of Connecticut. And I'm really honored that you all are spending your Friday evening with me nerding out about bats because I love to do that. And we are very close to Bat Week, which is in, I think, 2 weeks, right around the week of Halloween. So you might on social media see a lot of press about bats and opportunities to learn about bats during Bat Week. All right, so to get started, just a little bit about me. I am an extension professor, which means I do a lot of outreach. I work with our Natural Resources Conservation Academy, and we work with high school students and adult community volunteers as they carry out conservation efforts around the state. But prior to this, I got my PhD here at UConn, and for my research, I studied bats down in the tropics, but I continue to work with students and community volunteers to monitor and assess bats here in Connecticut. So today we're going to do bat acoustic monitoring, and I really do want this to be interactive. You can either sit back and watch, or I'd love for you to ask questions throughout. You can, well, you can't unmute yourself, but you can send questions in the chat box. I can't really see the chat box too well, so I might need a little help on.
I'll let you know.
Great. So let's get started. So we're going to be talking about bat acoustic monitoring and how it works. So bats, they have multiple senses, but one way they can sense their environment is by using sound. And so what they do is they emit these really, really high frequency sounds, and they have to be really high frequency because the sound wavelength needs to be no more than 2 times the length of the object that they need an echo off of. So if they're foraging for moths, they need a sound wavelength that is really, really high, around 20 kilohertz. So what does that even mean? Well, humans can hear between 20 to 20,000 hertz. So 20,000 hertz is 20 kilohertz. And that is at the very low range of those echolocation sounds that bats produce. Bat echolocation calls, so these calls that they want the echo off of, range from 20,000 hertz to 200,000 hertz. So they're really, really high. Some youth that can hear really well may be able to hear and detect some of these low frequency echolocation calls. But most of us, we can't hear those high pitched calls. So we need special monitoring equipment to be able to record and analyze these calls to get information about bats. So today we're going to be doing some virtual bat acoustic monitoring, and I'm going to show you a video where we go out bat acoustic monitoring together. But what you'll be seeing later on is this graphic right here. This is called a spectrogram. And what a spectrogram shows us is a visualization of a bat acoustic call. And so on this x-axis is time. So these little swoops here are pulses of call that are occurring over time. And on the y-axis is frequency, or hertz or kilohertz I'll be referring to. And so this is how we, this tells how high pitch or how low pitch the call is. And so we use characteristics of these calls to tell apart different species. These little red blobs up here are showing amplitude of the call, so how loud or how quiet they are. And so we can use this to interpret and learn more about the bats that are in our backyard. So something that's really cool about bat calls, they're not like bird calls. Bird calls are social calls, and they produce this repertoire that's very consistent and consistent and the same. And so social calls are used to communicate with other individuals of their species or other species, but bat calls are functional. So they change based on what they want to know about their environment. So this little graphic is showing us what a bat call looks like when they're just gradually navigating, flying through their area and want to generally know what's out there. And so they're slower, they tend to be lower in frequency and happen less often. As soon as they detect an insect prey, they start to pick up their call and start producing more calls that end up being higher frequency. And right before they eat their prey, they do this thing called a feeding buzz, where they have more kind of like this little trill of calls. A fun fact about bats is if you look up in this image up here, you might see something in between this bat's legs. They have, in between their legs, they have this membrane that's called a uropatagium. And it's basically just a skin that connects their two legs. And it's only in some species, but all the species that we have here have this uropatagium. And what they do right during this feeding buzz is they use that as a net and they scoop up the insects into their mouth right when they're about to consume them. So that's just a fun fact about them. So this spectrogram over here on the right-hand side is sort of showing this, where on the left-hand side, it's this bat that's sort of just gradually navigating throughout their territory. And then this one on the right-hand side is showing a bat that's actively pursuing and approaching an insect prey. So that's just a little bit about how it works. Now, because of COVID, we have to do this virtually. And so I'm going to take you virtually bat acoustic monitoring. And I hope I click the button to share the volume on this. So if you can't hear it, send a comment and we'll pause it and I'll restart it. All right, let's go virtual bat acoustic monitoring.
Good evening. Tonight we're going to be surveying our nocturnal flying mammals. You got it, bats. Bats are really important for ecosystems worldwide, but they're especially important to monitor here in Connecticut because many of our local species are under threat due to a disease called white nose syndrome. So to study bats, we're going to be using a non-invasive technique called acoustic monitoring, and I'm holding some of the equipment we'll be using. Acoustic monitoring is basically recording of animal sounds and using that to identify species and learn more about their behaviors. It's used for a wide variety of species, including birds, which you're hearing some right now, frogs, whales, and dolphins, to name a few. Okay, how it works. Bats emit high frequency sounds that then bounce off objects and return to them in the form of echoes or vibrations in which the bats can interpret. And they need to have these high frequencies because they need to have tiny sound wavelengths that are no more than 2 times the size of the object that they want an echo off of. So if they are foraging for prey that are tiny insects, they need to have really, really high frequency sounds. And for that reason, we need special recording devices to record these ultrasonic sounds. Using specialized ultrasonic recording devices, we can then digitize the calls of the bats and be able to visualize them and measure various characteristics to be able to identify species and other aspects of their behavior. And so what we're visualizing here is a spectrogram, and on the y-axis you see frequency, so it shows how these little swooping pulses of calls change in frequency from high pitch to low pitch, and how they change over time. So here's a bat call. All right, let's begin acoustic monitoring. Since the 1970s, the technology has advanced so much so that there's a wide variety of units that you can purchase, research grade ones that can be stationary or used for driving transects. Today, we're going to be using Wildlife Acoustics Echometer Touch, and we attach it to an iPad that has an app associated with it that allows us as community scientists to study and monitor bats in our community. And so all you need is the Echometer Touch, an iPad, all of which is on loan from the NRCA. All right, 6 steps for acoustic monitoring success. Step 1, you need a really cool outfit equipped with a headlamp and cool bat shirt. All right, the headlamp and shirt are optional, but you should have a flashlight and you should always go with a buddy. You also want to make sure you have your acoustic monitoring equipment, and for better recordings, you can elevate your acoustic monitoring recording device like I've done so on this elevating pole to get better recordings. Step 2. Next, you want to make sure to survey at sunset, so make sure to check when sunset is, as it's changed throughout the year, and survey for at least an hour after sunset. You also want to avoid bad weather, such as rainy days. This is not good for the equipment, as well as cold temperatures below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And you want to avoid surveying 3 days before and after the full moon. All of these factors impact bat activity. Step 3. Identify where you want to survey ahead of time. With this equipment, it's great for doing walking transects. You want to survey in areas like that act as flyways, such as roadsides, trails, forest edges. Also, surveying around bodies of water or rivers offer other great areas to survey bats. Step 4, be quiet. Also avoid clutter like tree branches so that you have good, clear acoustic recordings. Step 5, don't forget to hit the start and record button. The record button looks like a standard red dot. Step 6, use the bat symbol to get an initial assessment of the potential species. This one could be a silver-haired bat or a big brown bat. But warning, please be careful. These are probable estimates of which species it might be, and for a more rigorous vetting, you can send your wave files to us at the NRCA and we can run them through the Sonobat software. We're bat acoustic monitoring. It's 8:30 p.m., so just around sunset. And we have 2 bats flying overhead. We have a auto ID of an eastern red bat, which is one of our migratory species. They roost in trees. Oh, there's 2 overhead. And they have a very characteristic J-shaped acoustic bat call. So when you're bat acoustic monitoring, you look at the frequency and also the shape of the spectrogram. I love eastern red bats because they're this beautiful, vibrant red color, and they're one of our few bats here that can have up to 4 offspring at once. We're now getting bat acoustic calls that are very characteristic of the hoary bat, which is our largest bat here in Connecticut. It's also a migratory species. It preys on large moths and even known to predate on other small bats. Again, another one of my favorites, and it has a very distinct call, very low frequency call because it preys on larger prey items. Here's the calls that we got for the hoary bat. So they have these very characteristic shallow acoustic calls at a low frequency. Oh, I just had a bat fly overhead. And I made the classic mistake, did not start recording, so that's lost data right there. Every biologist hates when that happens. Finish surveying for the night. You can go up to the upper left-hand corner and go to your recordings and see calls that have potential species IDs that are indicated by a species code as well as a date and time stamp. You can revisit these calls and listen to them and enjoy. Good evening.
All right, thank you for joining me on a virtual bat walk. That was recorded this summer. As many of you probably experienced, we had to take a lot of our educational programs online, and so I work with the Natural Resources Conservation Academy, and we took our field experiences online, and this was made for that. In there, I mentioned that we go bat acoustic monitoring around sunset. So if we went out today actually was not too bad. It would have been a beautiful night. We'd go around 6 o'clock because that's when sunset. So you have to track when sunset is occurring that time of year. And then we also look at things like weather. It's around 50 degrees, so it's getting a little cold. And that's when the bats start being less active, but they're still, they haven't gone into hibernation quite yet. And I'll talk a little bit more about bats or natural history of bats later on.
Laura, Heather had a question where white nose syndrome comes from. What was it? Something that was brought over from another country or climate change? What's causing it?
So it's still the exact designation or arrival of it is still a little unknown, but it's presumed to be an introduced exotic species from Europe. It's found on European bats, and those bats persist and thrive with it on them. So they presume that they've co-evolved to live with this fungus over there in Europe. But it was brought here around 2007, or 2007 is when we noticed bats having them, and that was in a cave nearby here in New York. And now it continues to spread throughout North America. So it's not as much, it's not a problem in like Latin America, or it's a little bit of a problem in southern part of the US, but not as big of a problem. It's very prevalent up here in the northern part of the US and in Canada. And I'll talk a little bit more about that too later on.
Thanks.
Good evening. Tonight
Any other questions?
That was the only one that came through. So.
Okay, great. Oh, and thank you about my outfit. I am wearing that same shirt tonight. Forgot the headlamp, but all right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to learn to ID bat acoustic calls. And if you haven't, I'm going to send you the PDF. It's a key to help you identify different bat acoustic guilds. So if you all could download that. Once you've been able to download it, if maybe in the chat box you could say got it or downloaded, just so that I know that everyone's ready to go before I move on. And I'm going to pop open what it will look like. Ooh, I like the bat symbol. Nice. So it should look like this. Okay. All right. Well, while the rest of you continue to download it, I'm just going to orient you to what it's showing us. So at the top are 9 species of bats found here in Connecticut. So, and right below that is a table describing our bat acoustic guilds, which that's what we're going to be identifying. We're not going to be identifying down to species because that requires a more rigorous vetting using specialized software. But we're going to try and get the ballpark of what species we're hearing. And so the first bat acoustic guild is these Myotis bats. And so you'll notice that in this key, we have the species common name, their scientific name, and then just a abbreviation for their name. And that's what we use down here in this table. Over here is the page where you can see what that bat acoustic call looks like. So you can skip down to those pages. So our first type of bats are these really, really high frequency calls. The bottom of the call lands around 45 to 50 kilohertz. These are really, really high frequency calls. These are all our Myotis bats, which are also called our evening bats. And these are some of our more threatened and endangered bat species here in Connecticut. So if we get bat calls like that, it's really exciting, but we also have to be really careful and make sure that we're identifying them correctly. So I'm going to just jump down to show you what their calls look like. So they have these really steep calls. And then what you're looking at is you'll be able to read it better on the calls that I give you, but on the y-axis, you'll see frequency. And when the almost the flatlining part of the call lands around 40, 50 kilohertz, that's when you have a Myotis species, and then they have these little toes that tip down. The next kind of, the next bat acoustic guild is our 35 to 45 kilohertz J-shaped calls. And these are from two bat species, our tricolored bat and our eastern red bat. This is one of my favorite bats, as I mentioned. It's this beautiful, unique color. I love it. And so they have these little, they look more like J-shapes. So as you might notice, it doesn't have those little toes. And the base of these calls are landing right around 35 to 45 kilohertz. The next type of bat acoustic guild is the 30 kilohertz one. And so the calls might either look flat or they might look a little bit more J-shaped or hockey puck shaped. And so what you want to look for is that the base part of this, again, is landing around 25 to 30 kilohertz. This is made by our most common bat species here, our big brown bat. And so if you have bats, it's likely in your attic, it's likely the big brown bat, as well as this call can come from our silver-haired bat, which is a migratory bat species, which I'll talk about later. And then the last bat acoustic guild is our hoary bat. This is another one of my favorite bats. This is our largest bat species here in Connecticut. It eats, all our species here eat insects, but this species is also known to predate on small bats, in particular that tricolor bat that I talked about a second ago. And so because this bat predates on larger things like moths or bats, it doesn't have to produce a high frequency call. It only has to produce a lower frequency call. So those calls tend to be shallow, like flat lines almost, and they range, or they tend to be around 25 kilohertz. Any questions about that? I can give you all a minute to sort of look that over, become familiar with it, and I can answer any questions, and then I'm going to tell you about our competition. Okay, so a little bit about our bats here in Connecticut. So in the US, we have 47 different species. They come from 4 different taxonomic families. Most of them are what we call aerial insectivores, which means they fly through the sky, they scoop off prey, insect prey in the air. And many of them have what I described before, this urocritagium, which is the skin membrane in between their legs, and allows them to scoop up insect prey into their mouth. And down in the south, we have some frugivores and nectarivores. So we don't have the bats up here. We don't have any frugivores and we don't have any nectarivores. So in Connecticut, we have somewhere between 8 to 9 species. They're all aerial insectivores. And they come from this one family called Vespertilionidae. And this is our vesper bats or evening bats, which is their common name. These are some pictures of our bat species here. So you can see they're not all brown little jugs. They come in different colors and flavors. And I find them beautiful. But I think of them as flying teddy bears, trying to convince others to love bats as much as I do. So bats are extremely ecologically and economically important. Sorry, I can't speak tonight. And throughout the world, they're actually the second most diverse mammalian species or taxonomic group. And so they do a wide variety of things, but here in Connecticut, they're especially important to our ecosystems because they play an important role as pest or insect control. And so they're really, really important to agriculture. They consume several different crop species, and this includes cucumber beetles, June beetles, leafhoppers. And there's been numerous studies out there showing that even an average size bat colony of, like around 150 big brown bats can consume over 1 million insect prey per year. And so that's just one colony. And so when we add this up and assess this for, agriculture throughout the US for corn, it adds up to providing over $1 billion in herbivory. And that's just the US. This was one study. So they're incredibly important. In Connecticut, we have 2 different types of bats. We have those that stay here year-round and hibernate in permanent structures. And these are 5 of the species. So this includes our big brown bat, which is our most common bat species. And then it includes 3 of our Myotis species, our little brown bat, our Indiana bat, and our northern long-eared bat. And then our tricolor bat. So they all roost here year-round. And then we have 3 species that migrate here. And these species I was out bat acoustic monitoring with for the town of Mansfield a couple weeks ago, and I was still getting these bat species here. And so they come here in April, May from southern US, and they stay here until around October, and then they'll migrate back down south. And so many of our bat species are of special concern. So all our Myotis bats are state endangered, and 2 of them are federally listed. All of our migratory species are listed as special concern in our state. And so really, it's our big brown bat that's doing really well, and all our other bat species need our help. And the reason for this, why they're easily threatened by various things, is because they're long-lived. So it's a lot different than rodents. They're not rodents. They are long-lived mammals. They can live between 18 to 20 years out in the wild. And they also have 1 to 2 pups per year. And the reason for this is because they often have to fly with their pup and move their pup. And that pup can be 25% of the adult's weight. And so I have a couple young, little ones myself, and I can't imagine carrying something that is, or let alone flying with something that is 1/4 of my weight. So they can't have many offspring. I did mention in the video that our Eastern red right here in the middle can have up to 4 young in the summertime, and that's extremely rare for bats. And so in those cases, if they have to move their young, they're moving them, 1 at a time or 2 at a time at the most. So there's a number of different things that could threaten bat species, from habitat disturbance or fragmentation to noise pollution or whatnot. But a big one here in the US is white nose syndrome. And so what this is it's a fungus, an exotic fungus that was introduced here in the US And it grows on their membranes, on their muzzle, and on their skin, on their wing membranes. And so it was found in, oh, I said 2007. It was found in 2006 by cavers that were caving in, we're in a cave in New York. And so this is a cold-loving fungus that only grows on bats while they're hibernating. So it's only going to impact those hibernating species, so not our migratory species. And what it does is it arouses the bat species more so than they would normally arouse during their while they're hibernating, and so they're burning through their fat storage as well as becoming dehydrated, and that's presumed what kills them. And so this is a map showing how white nose syndrome has spread throughout the U.S. So the darker colors are where we first saw it, and these lighter colors are where it has bounced or spread throughout the years. And this is as recent. This map is was produced a year ago, so they haven't even updated it. I think they're just getting tired of tracking it now. But it bounced or pop up over in Washington a few years ago, and that was really disconcerting to see that jump. So as I mentioned, we have 5 bat species that hibernate here year round. And so from September to October, they'll go into their hibernaculum, or permanent structure where they hibernate for the winter. And they'll hibernate from November to April. So soon they'll be going into hibernation. And a cool fun fact about bats right before they go to hibernation, they'll do this thing, the swarming behavior, where they'll swarm outside their hibernaculum. And during that time, they'll mate. And when they mate, what they do this really cool adaptation called delayed fertilization. And that's where the female will store the sperm, but then won't allow fertilization to happen until they come out of hibernation. And this allows her to save her fat storage for hibernation, and then allow the egg to be fertilized, and then they have young shortly after that in May, July. So just a cool thing that bats around here do.
Laura, Heather had a question about white nose syndrome. How do they measure the rates of white nose syndrome?
Oh, what do you mean by that? Measure where it's showing up?
Yes, Heather's nodding her head.
So they'll, in each state, they have different agencies that are actively monitoring bats. And so they know of hibernaculum where bats will hibernate, and they'll go there and do frequency checks of bats. So that's what they do.
Thanks.
Yep. And so in the warmer months, oh, and I should also mention during white nose syndrome, some agencies will do repeated checks, and have also noticed some bats being able to survive with white nose, with the fungus on them. So that is somewhat, that gives us a little bit of hope, but for these populations to rebound, it's going to take many, many years because they have this low reproduction rate. And so in the warmer months, bats will often switch their roosting site, and many will roost they'll use trees to roost, or they might switch it to roost in barns or other types of structures. And so when they roost, they might roost under exfoliating barks or in crevices of trees, live trees, as well as snags, which are dead trees. And so females tend to form these maternity colonies where males will roost by themselves. And in these maternity colonies, they'll rear their young. Young are born from anywhere from May to June. And then they fledge around late August. So in 30 days, they're weaned and they're able to fly on their own. So what makes a good maternity colony tree? For different bat species, they don't tend to show, I guess, affinity to a specific species of tree, but they'll roost in a wide variety of species. Here, shagbark hickory is great, which are this tree down in the lower corner, or this one up here in the upper right-hand corner. But trees that have lots of cavities in them or exfoliating bark, these make for good trees. So if you have land and you notice trees like these are good trees to maintain on your property sometimes to provide great wildlife habitat. So our migratory species will come up here from May to September, May to October. And they only roost in trees. So they'll roost in, our eastern redbat will roost in foliage, and our other species will roost in loose bark and cavities. Similarly, females form maternity colonies, but these tend to be smaller in size, and males will roost on their own. And similar to our hibernating species, they produce young from May to June, and those offspring are weaned within 30 days. So really an important time to support bats is during the sensitive time when they have maternity colonies from May to August. That's a great time to not bother any species if you have some roosting in your attic because they might have a maternity colony, or it's a great time to provide them with a bat house that's specific for maternity colonies. Oh, and then October and November, they'll migrate down south. Other great features that are important habitat features are waterways, ponds. They love to use also trails or any sort of road corridors also to travel. All right, so what are some things that we can do to help bats? I'm just gonna check on my time. Oh, I got 5 minutes. So some things that you can do is not disturb hibernaculum. So if you know of a hibernaculum, that would be pretty cool. Or a maternity colony, you don't want to disturb them during sensitive times from April to August, or from May to August when they have their pups, and also when they're hibernating from November to March. So some opportunities, if you do have bats in your attic and you're looking to remove them, is to remove them from early April to May or late August to November. This is in between those times when they have pups or the maternity colonies or when they're in hibernation. So those are opportunities to evict them if they are in your home. Retaining those large diameter snags, so those are those dead trees. And we talk about this reserve island around these trees, some sort of forested area, because these provide such great summer roosting habitat. And then you can also provide them with artificial roosts, and this includes bat houses. And then if you manage a large property, avoiding or using minimal herbicide or pesticides near these roost sites. And then finally, light pollution and noise pollution can also be various disturbances to them. So keeping that in mind. So just to talk a little bit about bat houses, if you're interested in providing some artificial habitat for them, bat houses are a great way, but you want to make sure that you set them up properly. I visited multiple properties that they had bat houses, but they were installed incorrectly, and so they were not being used. And so they won't, if you install them incorrectly, it won't do any harm. But if you really want to attract bats, you want to follow a couple guidelines. So what bat houses do is they provide that summer roosting for maternity colonies. And they serve a great purpose by attracting insects to your yard. And so what you want to do is you want to make sure here, any bat houses, you want to paint them black so that they become an ideal temperature for bats. The best time to install them is really any time, but it's great to get them out there before spring so that they can be used that following summer. And what you never want to do is put them on a tree. And the reason for this is because when they're installed on a tree, predators can easily access them and either have a little bat snack, or the bats will just be smart enough and know not to roost in that site. And so if you install a single chamber, which is those really thin flat ones, they only have one chamber. This is more like a bachelor pad, and so they're great, but they need to be installed on a building or back to back on a pole with another single chambered one so that they maintain enough heat in them. What's even better is installing a multi-chamber one, also known as a nursery house, because this provides habitat for those maternity colonies. And so if you're able to do that, installing those, a big one on a pole or on your house or on a building is great. And then finally, you want to make sure that you install it high enough so that when bats exit, they have enough of a flyway to fly out. So it needs to be at least 10 feet above the ground and at least 20 feet from any sort of clutter or tree clutter. And so this prevents any predators from accessing it, as well as allowing them to exit out of the bat house. And then trying to orient it towards the sun so that it gets at least 6 hours of full sun. And if possible, if you can position it near a water source, but that's not necessary always, because there's multiple water sources around folks that you may be unaware of. But if a water source is within a quarter mile, that is also a benefit. So that's all I have, and I will take, it's 8 o'clock, so I can stay on and take any questions, but also thank you so much for joining me tonight. I hope you had fun, getting to know bats a little bit more and hear their bat acoustic sounds.
Thank you very much, Laura. And we will take a minute to answer any questions. At this point, if you'd like to unmute yourself and verbally ask your question, feel free to do so. You can also type it in the chat. If you're, heading off to bed, or maybe you have some grand plans for the rest of the evening, you are welcome to go as well. But thank you all for being here. Heather had a question about how to keep woodpeckers away from the bat houses.
Oh, I honestly don't have an answer to that. I will look into that. Is that a problem you're experiencing with your bat house? Sorry, I'm going to pull up the chat. Oh, I'm so sorry. That you might want to just try repositioning where your bat house is. That might be a shot at trying to deter any woodpeckers from coming into it, but I don't know off the top of my head. Another thing you want to make sure of when you do install a bat house is check it to make sure that no bees or wasps have inhabited it, because that's another deterrent for bats, and that it's a common thing that happens as well.
So we were wondering how you carry a quarter of your weight, like where? How does it attach? Do you stick it on your back? Does it cling like a marsupial? How does that work?
So normally it will just be on your side, just like you would if you were carrying a baby. And when I've caught, because when I did my research, I used mist nets, so we would actually physically catch bats. And a lot of times they're latched on with their feet as well as latched onto the nipple. So the baby is actually latched onto the mom, and then the mom flies. Very impressive.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Oh, I saw Lauren had more of a question. Sorry, I'm just getting to this.
Yeah, I realized I misread it too.
Nope, that's all right. Lauren asks, is there a specific type or size of bat house that works best for attracting bats? So I've seen 2-chamber, 3-chamber, and 4-chamber bat houses work equally well that have lots and lots of bats in them. And you just want to make sure that it's large enough, I think at least 24 inches long and a certain width, but I can't remember off the top of my head. And if you are looking to buy a bat house, make sure it's not one of those tiny little ones, because those won't be able to maintain any heat. Really, 2-3-chamber bat house is really what you want. And if you buy from somebody, looking to see if they have that Bat Conservation International certified bat house is best, because they're following their plans that Bat Conservation International did rigorous research on what type of models work best, and so those have been the most successful models.
Laura, I'm after this, would you maybe send me some of the resources that you would recommend for people who might be looking to either, maybe try out some of the acoustic monitoring equipment, or
Sure.
looking into bat houses, that kind of thing, and I can send it out to those who participated?
Sure. Yep. So Heather, I am admittedly not up to date on the latest with white nose syndrome, but I have heard a little bit that there are some bat species that are, some individuals that they're seeing that are coming out of hibernation. They had the fungus on them, and they are able to survive or persist into the summer. And once they make it into the summertime, that the fungus can't persist on them because it's a cold loving fungus, and so they are able to survive it. But I don't know how, I guess, common or persistent that is across the US and across species.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been awesome. And I was thinking about, this was early on in New York Times reporting about COVID, so really early on.
Okay.
And the New York Times had an article about the possible transmission in Wuhan. And they were talking about how bats have adapted to living with multiple infectious viruses.
Oh, yes.
So this wasn't about the fungus. This was about actual viruses. And I think the Times said something about how that was supposed to be connected to their ability to be flying mammals. But
yes, okay, sorry, I misread your comment. Yes, yeah, so they are, they're known as reservoirs for a number of viruses. Most of them are not zoonotic, so they're not transmitted to humans, but some of them are. And I have a colleague that does virus or work with bat viruses, but myself, I'm not an expert in this field, but it is extremely interesting.
All right, if there are no other questions, we'll wrap it up and call it a night. Again, thank you all so much for being here, and if you have any follow-up questions or anything like that, feel free to reach out to myself and I can get you connected with Laura. And otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful evening and fantastic weekend. Thank you all very